Hello, everyone out there, and welcome to another session of Mita's Deep Dive Express modules. These are being brought to you by our gracious sponsor, 420 Collections. 420 Collections has two brands under their umbrella. The first one is 420 Medibles. There are some deliciously potent medibles available throughout the great state of Arizona at licensed dispensaries, as well as 420 Skincare, which is their CBD fused and topical line that is available throughout the country. So we are very gracious for our sponsors for letting us be able to put on this program here. We have two fabulous individuals with us, Miss Josephine Giordano. I don't think I'm saying your name right.
Giordano, you got it, Kate.
There we go. All right. And then we have Mr. Mark Slaw with us as well. So today we're going to talk about business plans in cannabis. But before we get started, I wanted to give each of our panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves more fully and give a little bit of a background before we dive into the meat of today. So Josephine, you want to go first?
Sure, thank you. Thank you for having me. My name is Josephine Giordano. I'm a CPA here in Arizona. I'm with Beach Fleischman. We're one of Arizona's largest locally owned CPA firms. We have clients throughout the US, Canada, and Mexico. I've been in the cannabis industry for probably 5 years now. We provide tax, audit, consulting, business valuation, litigation support, and turnaround management services, operational compliance, and all that fun stuff to the cannabis industry.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah, a lot of experience in a lot of different areas and sort of that back-end administration and the part of business that a lot of people don't really see. So yeah, thank you for being with us today.
Thank
Mark?
you.
Yeah, thanks guys. My name is Mark Slaw. I'm the CEO and founder of iComply. iComply has been around since 2011. I got involved probably back in 2008, 2009 here in Colorado when the industry kind of first took off and the Fed said, hey, we're not going to touch anything. So I've been through the ringer. I often say I kind of live in the future in terms of seeing other new markets come around. We've helped a lot with policy regulation. I tell people we're not in the cannabis business. We're in a political and legal business first. After that, we're in a regulatory compliance business, licensing, all of that. And then finally, you can grow and sell marijuana legally without getting in trouble. So there's kind of the world of operational compliance that iComply does and that we're involved with over 300 clients in our 10 years of operations in about 14, 15 different state markets and serving international clients as well as we start to look at and evolve the international marketplace. So my background's really everything to do with the rules and regulations and all the boring, non-fun stuff like SOPs, audits, and ongoing compliance management.
Yeah, but that's the stuff that keeps business going, Mark. So I'm looking forward to getting your perspective as we talk about in business plans, because that's crucial. Both aspects of running a successful business is knowing the back end and doing things right. All right, so we're going to go ahead and dive in. So just to kind of give a quick background on myself, my name is Caleb Tice. I'm going to be the host here today. I have been in the industry myself for a little over 10 years. I have my own consulting firm, Canna Owners, that provide services across the country. So there pretty much isn't anything when it comes to cannabis that I haven't had my hands on. So, all right, I want to go ahead and open it up. So, Mark, what is a business plan and why is it important?
Oh my gosh. So, I often tell people you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Planning in general in business is extremely important. And a business plan is the overall look at what is our business? What is it we intend to do? How are we going to get there? And how much money are we going to make along the way? It's critical to be able to attract early stage investors if you don't have your own money, and all of us aren't, Mr. Moneybags with deep pockets. And it's really important also if you're going to be in the cannabis business, because oftentimes many states are going to require a business plan before you actually get a license. You have to go through oftentimes a very competitive process to get that license and pay thousands of dollars just to apply with no guarantee that you're actually going to win a license. So even in states with new social equity programs, you're not going to find investors, you're not going to be able to win a license, and you're planning to fail if you don't really carry out a solid, complete and comprehensive business plan that's based in real world numbers.
Definitely. I think thank you for that last point, Mark. Reasonability and rational approach. I can't say enough about that.
Yeah, you can't tell you how many CBD business plans I've looked at that just didn't anticipate oversupply, and all of a sudden they're not making $50,000 an acre. They might be making 5,000. That's a huge difference that people need to anticipate and look at, especially with regard to the data they're collecting. Can't be data from 2018. The market's completely changed within just a few short years.
Yep. You got to stay current, definitely. Josephine, what are some of the things for a cannabis business plan? What are some unique aspects along the lines with what Mark kind of laid out for us?
Well, I mean, and let me go back to what Mark was saying. I mean, it's really, really important to have a business plan. I mean, not just internally so that you have really a map of what your goals are and have we achieved those goals. Look, it's a fluid document. So it changes, periodically. You need to change and kind of go with the flow as things are moving along. But it's not just internally. I mean, everybody wants to see a business plan. I mean, the banks want to see it. The investors want to see it. The business valuators want to see it. I mean, the whole concept of a business plan is really the approach that we use even in business valuation. I mean, everything that we're going to talk about what's in a business plan, particularly in this industry, we look at exactly those things when we're valuing the company. And back to Mark's comment, that's probably the most important part of this whole thing is the feasibility of those numbers. I mean, what are the numbers you're putting down and projecting into the future, and are they feasible? And really, how are you going to get there? I mean, that's what everybody wants to know. I remember years ago, before we were even rec, putting together or looking at management's projections for what they expected in the next 10 years. And that was under the assumption that we're going to go rec. And, looking at those numbers and saying, geez, what am I going to do with this? You're really, I mean, the numbers were unbelievable. But quite honestly, in hindsight, I could see that they've achieved those goals along the way, and they've really monitored what they were working on. So anyway, within this industry itself, there's a lot of different things, and a lot of twists and turns. And like Mark had said, the regulatory environment involved with it, the compliance, the standard operating procedures, and just really having full knowledge of your industry. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into different operating companies, not just in cannabis, but any of them, particularly on startups, and they really don't have a grasp on what the industry is doing before, they're coming up with their own plan, but they don't even know what the market is doing. They don't know what their competition is doing. They don't know.
They're going blind, basically, is what.
Yes, there really are blind in doing this, and that's the main takeaway here is really knowing your industry, your market, your competitors, and your products. I mean, that's the key to the whole plan, to be able to then project on a reasonable, feasible basis.
Definitely, because that's one thing I know you two have both probably been exposed to this, of the thought of anyone outside of the industry or just coming in and enter that it just prints money, that you're going to make money no matter what. It doesn't matter. You're going into cannabis and it's going to be successful. Because I actually think back to, there was a congressman, I can't remember the name, but it's like, if you can't make money in cannabis, then you don't know how to run a business. And it just made me chuckle a bit of like, well, yes, this could potentially be a lucrative industry, but you have to run your business right. You got to train your employees. You got to know your burn rate and understand where you're going into, that the market's going to be able to bear. I mean, I think it's, Mark, you hit it with CBD, of nobody really anticipated that glut and then that huge contraction that we're seeing. Fortunately, things have stabilized a bit, but who knows what this year's crop's going to do to that.
100%.
Well, you'd even be surprised that, companies don't even have like the basic break-even analysis where, where do I have to be to just break even? So to then know, everything above and beyond that is profitability. So they don't even know their break-even point. So that's a basic area that needs to get addressed within that plan and understand it.
Yeah, and I think that it's not just CBD. So I want to also kind of point out some historical examples with regard to Oregon when they were selling $50 pounds because way too many grows popped up. A lot of people thought, hey, California is going to be a great market. It's kind of the root ball of the American cannabis industry. But if you don't have enough shelf space, if you don't have enough retail outlet for the product, you're going to have an oversaturation of cultivators, producers, much like we see in Nevada as well, which causes competition and drives price down. So even right now in Cali, considered one of the best markets out there, prices are going for 500 a pound or so. And then you also have just market forces that happen nationally. So look at the disruption that Oklahoma did by giving everyone a license at $750 with no oversight or no control. You're starting now a 2,000-mile closer jump point to supply the illegal black market. And because of that, you're seeing prices diminish on the black market as well as on the legitimate market. So there's multiple forces always competing with each other in these analyses or in these projections that savvy people that are putting together a business plan, people that are experts in this industry, can help you with to make sure that your numbers are as accurate as possible and that you can truly anticipate what that break-even point is, as well as what you can reasonably expect to make. I'm more of a conservative guy, so I like to under promise and over deliver. And I always suggest really curtailing down your expectations on revenue and always boosting back up in those financials a little bit of the cost. Because I'll tell you, in this industry, it's not like a normal fire department inspection. You could be waiting 6 or 9 months holding on to that rent because that fire department's never dealt with an extraction lab before. We're having to deal with class 1, div 1 fireproof, bomb sheltered type equipment that you need for compliance in order to get through the process. So always add a little extra on top of it and always underestimate your revenues. Give yourself a more realistic projection of what you're going to make back on that business plan. Especially in some of these markets. And to that point, what you're really looking at are these pillars in the regulation itself, which create an economically viable market or not. So, I was maybe one of the few people saying, hey, don't invest in Cali unless you've got a dispensary, because you can kind of see the writing on the wall if you know what you're looking for.
Yep. So that leads me into my next question of what are some of those questions the cannabis entrepreneur should be asking? I mean, I've heard you guys mention break-even analysis. That's a very important one. How much do I have to produce to even to make it to where I don't lose anything? Environmental analysis of thinking about the fires and the other things happening, the increase in materials and what we've seen in build out costs and other stuff in this first 6 months. So what are some of those questions that that the entrepreneur should be asking as they're sitting down and starting to write that plan?
And let me and to answer that, and then also to address the elephant in the room when we're talking about finances. I mean, one thing they forget to address is the whole 280E issue. So we could sit, that is a huge piece of this, and I think sometimes operators forget about that, or at least the ones starting out, because that really has a financial impact going forward. And that needs to definitely be considered on a break-even analysis, because that tax, could be very, very significant and really dig deep into your cash flow. So that's super important to remember.
Yep. And having somebody like Josephine to evaluate those financials and ensure that you have incorporated this 280E, which is unique to cannabis, and also more to Mark's point of double reviewing your costs, doing some comparison against industry averages on part of that feasibility.
Right. And that's something that's done in all industries. I mean, whenever we're looking at any type of a plan, you always want to look at benchmark data. So, in cannabis, it's kind of hard to find because it's new. I mean, it's even hard for us as business valuators when we're trying to look at the market and see what, things are selling for. Well, we don't have the kind of data that we have for, let's say the construction industry. So, it's a lot of it is word on the street, and we've got to kind of pull as much data as we can together when we're looking at those benchmarks and, what are other companies in your competition doing.
Yeah, and I think to Josephine's point, she's hitting in the nail on the head, sort of the industry averages or really what are going to be the variables in your business models, in your business plan. So things like yields might be very different for you growing at home than they are going to be at a commercial level and they can be strain specific, genetic specific for a grower. But those yields are going to matter in terms of how much you can get per light or how many grams per plant if you're going to reasonably expect to sell per pound. And then you have the market prices, which are more indexed and can fluctuate with more competition, which can be an issue. On extraction, depending on how you extract, you can get a different yield percentage for your extraction, and each different extraction equipment comes with different costs and other considerations that have to be taken into account, whether you're doing live rosin pressing for one type of product, or you're going to make butter, or you're going to do CO2 or butane extraction. So all of those things can change the business model, and there's always the relative ratio of your future clients, which may be business to business only, or in the case of dispensaries, your customers. How many barriers are in the way with this particular state model that are going to cause less of a patient participation rate in the industry? If there's no flower sales, is it really worth going into that market? If the flower sales are vaporizer only, that's going to impact some of those sales projections. So there's a lot of different variables when you're doing your business planning, which can be sort of industry benchmark, and to Josephine's point, are kind of hard to find because you have such variety in different state models. We really have like a patchwork of different laws for every single state. In a lot of ways, we're all waiting for federal legalization for some level of standardization to come down, especially with regard to interstate commerce. But each state is going to be completely different. Florida is not like Arizona in any way, shape, or form, even though they might have some cross-comparative similarities. So you really have to have folks like Josephine and myself to help navigate that process, because it can be quite confusing when you're trying to do business planning.
And you've got to watch too, people tend to try to make correlations with what's going on in other states. I mean, it's great if we've got states like Colorado, California, that have been in it for a while. We try to retrieve that data and do something with it, but it's not necessarily comparable data, although we're trying to use it. So that's really important to watch what you're doing. Like I had looked at one set of projections where, they were looking at, in Colorado, this is what happened, so we expect in Arizona that this is what's going to happen. A nice thought, it's something to consider, but it's certainly not carved in stone that because, Colorado did this, that Arizona will do the same. So that's really important. And when I work with customers, clients in other states, the same thing, they're trying to compare to Arizona or Colorado, and I say, well, it doesn't necessarily work that way. So we need a better approach than that to be able to put out some reasonable projections.
Yep, what I found is looking in that same market, but maybe like a year over year comparative, or looking at maybe growth curves, and some of those can help. But I think to other industries, like nationwide companies don't have the same strategy that they would have in Arizona, that they'd have in California, that they'd have in Oregon. There's different people, different culture in each state that's going to drive both what products they're going to want, how much they're willing to pay for it. And I think actually, Mark, the biggest thing is how many other businesses are you competing with, and how many other businesses can you sell to? Because a big part of the supply chain is business to business, where it's you only have a certain number. I mean, in Arizona, we're talking about 130 licensed entities. That's pretty limited on your potential outlet. So that's something that you really have to consider in the Arizona market as compared to, California, where we're dealing with more of a kind of a glut of supply would be a good term.
Yeah, and they designed the model that way on purpose, right? The platinum ticket is the dispensary in Vegas. The platinum ticket is the dispensary in LA. It's not really the growers. And so, yeah, it depends on the policies completely. And to your point too, Caleb, it may seem like a lot of competitors. And in Denver, we have 300 dispensaries, and they're opening up new ones. We're also selling $2 billion a year. So you have to keep in mind too, that it's not just your competing businesses that you're up against in a geographic neighborhood that have licenses. But if you have a huge gap and there are no dispensaries, there are no delivery services, you're competing with the black market. So it's not like marijuana's new just because it got legalized, right? It's been here. You can check black market price indexes for your area and kind of know what people are already paying, because they've had it for, right, since Prohibition 80 plus years ago. So it's not a new concept, but there's an existing distribution and sales model already in place called the black market, the illegitimate market, that you'll be competing against.
Yep,
Right, and
which
then when
is-
you've got these really high excise taxes, that get slapped on, that's where that black market competition really, comes into focus, that it's certainly competition out there.
Yeah, the
And
only
you
way
got
to
to
beat
find
them
there's
is
going to be that
economies of scale.
percentage base as far as on like with the black market of there's a certain point at which it's pure economics is going to drive it of whether or not it's people wanting to support that legal industry. There's always that possibility. So sorry to interrupt, Mark.
No, you're fine. I think your guys you're absolutely on point. When I first started selling weed back in college, it was $50, $60 an eighth. Now you could never get that in Colorado. Maybe if you did some very connoisseur branding or something along those lines, but it forces the black market out of competition. The cartels don't grow our marijuana anymore. It's not coming from Mexico in bricks with, we're all happy to pick out stems and seeds back in the day. It's now coming from places like Oklahoma, Colorado, through caregivers. And really it's a domestic market that's supplying the illegitimate market. And just like you have moonshiners and bootleggers in dry counties, right? Still to this day, it's going to be really dependent on whether or not these local governments opt in, whether or not there's enough saturation to offset and make the legitimate market factors outweigh the black market pricing and convenience, right? Because if you can go get safety, product quality, selection, consistency, and a good price in a great atmosphere, then a dispensary delivery service is going to be, hands down the number one thing you do. It's not like Colorado keeps growing 30% every year because we have 30% new adults using marijuana. It's because we're converting people from the illegitimate market to the legitimate market. And I think that a lot of other states that allow for enough access points are going to see something very similar.
Yep, I agree. All right, so let's kind of dive into the business plan. So what I want to do is just go over the sections to give an overview and then really just talk through about what each of those mean to our panelists. So starting the first and foremost in a business plan is always going to be your executive summary. So what is that?
What I write last.
I mean, everything we do always starts with that executive summary. You know what? Get to the point, because you're going to have a lot of detail backing up this plan, right? So let's summarize it. Let's get to the point. What's the goal? What's the objective? And how are we going to get there? It's like basically, it's like being on a dating website, like put out your best information, right away, and then we could dig deeper a little later. So that's what the executive summary purpose is.
Yeah, I usually use it as an area to outline what I want to say in the business plan.
Mm-hmm.
And you leave those outlines as sort of bullet points, if you will, like any outline.
Mm-hmm.
And then I jokingly say I write it last because I make sure that I hit every single point within the business plan. And then I put the fluff around it to contextualize what I've written after that. So the executive summary is essentially what you're putting in the document in 1 or 2 pages to give people a heads up of the key points and what it is that you've accomplished through that sort of outline into the rest of the business plan. So that's why I jokingly say I write it last, because that's when you put the meat on the bones.
And remember, so there are some investors out there that just look at the executive summary and like, I don't have time to read, 300 pages worth of information. I'm just going right to that executive summary. So that's a key, even though people think, oh, well, let me just write something short and sweet. I mean, it should have some substance to it. And like you said, writing it at the end sometimes makes the most sense.
Yeah. So think of it, it's like an elevator pitch almost, because you're absolutely right. I mean, we all, time is at a premium in this world today. So you need to be able to get your point across. And it's also a way for you to internally be, what is this business and how quickly can I communicate that out to someone? Because if you can't communicate what it is you're trying to do in short and sweet, it's not going to be successful. Okay, so next topic, or the next point that you go into after the summary, is the company overview. So this could include a whole host of things. What are some recommendations, Josephine, on what they should include about the company there?
Well, and if we're talking about a startup or one that's so for a startup, I mean, basically, who are the key players in this? I mean, let's talk about assembling the team. Who's the team, the company, where's our location? Have we secured real estate? Do we have a location? What information do we have about the company? And it might be very limited. You might not have that much to go on, but to incorporate into that, what your expectation is and what you plan to have. I plan to have, a dispensary here, or, we plan on having 5 locations, within the next year, or, whatever it might be, but articulating that for the company description.
So would you recommend including things about brand and kind of about like the history of the company? Because
if you've got a history, if they don't have a history, obviously there's no, but if you do have a history and how you got there, that'd be great. I mean, put it in there. The company description to me, I mean, is usually not too much, because that detail about management and location and brand and all those things usually comes in after the fact. So whatever historical information you can give, if there is any, or maybe even the backgrounds of, the individuals that are involved in it, although that might fall under the management discussion section, maybe putting a little bit of that into your company description would be helpful.
Yep, I always like is kind of the story of why you want to go into business. So almost maybe like the story of how the business idea came about, like kind of how the partners came together. Because I found because that helps with your brand development. And I think is where we're at as an industry with brands, and with that aspect becoming more of a component of the industry. That is what people are looking at for the company, of really how are they going to gain loyalty and with your brand or with your company, is finding out why you're in business and learning a bit about you. It's an opportunity to just kind of say why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Maybe what makes you different, what make you different from everybody else. And, and I know you're going to talk about sources of information, but a good source and a really good place to go really for any business, a business owner, is the Small Business Administration website. They do a good job of laying out templates and things like that for business plans, and kind of telling you what should go in a company description. And if you're trying to create this from scratch, it's not, it may not be the best thing to maybe submit for purposes of, an investor or a bank, because it might be too simplistic, but at least it gets your mind going as to what I need to put in there, and addresses the questions that you need to ask yourself, before writing them up.
Yeah, there's a lot of great services that are out there for that, both from a consulting standpoint. There's templates and other things. I could just gotta tell you, do not take a template off the shelf and then just go and try to submit it. I've seen that in cannabis recently, actually. So it was pretty clear, as you see a copyright up on the front, and the logo is exactly the same. And templates are great to get your mind started. I can't tell you enough. I don't know, maybe it's my education background of that's like turning in a paper that you just went and grabbed off of the internet. So,
well, that reminds me of resume writing. You ever get a resume come in and say, gosh, I could swear I just saw this resume somewhere else with almost the exact language in it, that's more of a cut and paste. So, investors, banks, other professionals, they want to see thought process, in preparing it.
Yeah, what I would just add for this section, and those are all awesome points, is that oftentimes I'll use this to kind of outlay the competitive strategy of the company. So there's really kind of 3 major ones. You're either going to be a niche operator in your specialty. Think of those as like the laboratories of the industry. There's not a lot of them. They do something very specific. It's a great business to be in, but you got to have really niche technical expertise to be in it. Most commonly, people are shooting for one of these 2, which is low cost leadership. So you end up being the cheapest guy in town. You're the Walmart of the world, and you're selling as much as you can at the cheapest price possible. And if you're going to do that, and that's your goal, say it right there in your company description. Let people know what you're really up to, what your market positioning is going to be, because that's really what you're looking at in terms of the company description. And the last one, really important, and I really suggest going through a marketing position exercise. You can Google it online. It'll give you an idea of who your target market is, how you're going to differentiate yourself. that differentiation strategy is going to be really important, because if you're in a bank or an investor looking at hundreds of cannabis pitches, all of them start sounding the same at some point, as Josephine and I probably know all too well. And I'm really looking for that something special that makes not just the history of the company unique, or maybe a social equity applicant, as if we're talking about Arizona and other states, but really what's going to position the company in a place that's going to make it successful. It's going to make it different than everyone else around, right? So you start thinking about it from that perspective. It's there's a really special thing that ends up happening in that company description.
And I think we should bring, while we're talking about that, I mean, just the concept of a mission statement. I mean, that's the terminology that's used. I mean, we want to come up with that mission statement, like, think back at Tom Cruise and trying to think, what was that movie where he had to come up with the mission statement?
Is that Jerry Maguire?
Jerry Maguire, that's right. So, that's the first thing. What's my mission statement? And that's going to drive, everything else going forward.
Definitely.
Yeah. And to tag to that too, company values. What are you about?
Right.
Right. And oftentimes we're working with clients, cultural transformation from, say, the illegitimate industry to a legitimate industry, or just getting them from startup mode to a corporation. These things are really important to help them define internally, so they know who they are, and to see if people fit that culture or not, because a combination of that mission statement and who they are in terms of their values, who you say you are to the world, matters.
Yes, it does. Yes,
Great.
the value statement is becoming more. It was kind of incorporated a bit into the company background, but I think in the last few years it's gained in the forefront to where it's really that mission, vision, value statement. It's all three of them are integral parts, because people want to know why you're in business, who you are, what do you stand for. I mean, that's the paradigm of where business is going, is what do you stand for and why are you in business? So, okay. So we touched a little bit about market analysis already. That's very important. I mean, Mark hit on it, and that could be one thing that I want to touch on is with looking into market analysis, that we touched on how you can't really compare from other markets, but one thing that you could maybe do is look at something that's being done in another market, but not being done where you are, as an opportunity to be able to be as part of the differentiator, being that you're the only one doing that particular product. So any other points on the market analysis either one of you guys want to touch on?
No, I mean, I think again, if you can find the benchmarks, that's key. Gather as much information as you possibly can. I mean, even visiting, your competition, walking into their dispensaries, getting a sense of their operation and their employees and things like that. It's a really good learning tool to see how others operate. And as consultants, we've been able to go in and out of different operations, and we can see where the strengths are and where the opportunities are for certain operators, and what they've learned along the way.
Yeah, I did that when I was managing my retail spots, is I would send my management team out to go secret shop and tell me what they liked about the other businesses. Okay. What are they doing great? What are some things? So rather than going and being like, why are we better? I flipped it on them of like, no, go and find like, why are people going over there versus coming here? What are some ways that we could use some of their best practices that we don't know that we're not doing? So it's very, very important. And a lot of times you can go in and just kind of have a conversation, and people will want to talk about themselves and talk about their business and what they're doing. You'd be amazed about just going in and asking and saying, I love what you're doing here. Tell me a little bit more about your business, and floodgates will open. So it never hurts to ask. So the next stage in the business plan, which is of vital importance, is you've done all this planning, evaluation, you've done your research, strategy and implementation. What is that?
Well, I mean, when you're talking about strategy, I mean, we're talking about, operational strategies to basically maintain, well, first of all, to be in compliance, obviously, but, to create that internal control environment and really have a tight and a top-notch operation. I mean, that goes across the board to any industry. So you need to strategize about that. And of course, finances, of course, you're strategizing when you're putting together your projections that talk about products. One thing I notice is that, and like every industry, products, the margins on those products. I mean, I know you have to keep certain things in stock, just because you have to, but they might not necessarily be high margin items. So you really want to take account and inventory of what you really have and what's selling. It's that, it's that strategy of what's selling, what do people want? And again, that changes. That could change next week, it could change next month. So you really have to stay on top of it. Just because this product was the big hit, in the month of March, it might not be the big hit, at the end of the year. So you have to really strategize on product development, what you're going to do new, how are you going to bring those new faces in, how are you going to keep them in? I mean, that's really important. And looking at your bottom line, very often. I mean, I see a lot of these operators who don't even really know their numbers. If you ask someone who's operating a business in cannabis or any industry, oh, how did you do last month? I don't know. Well, you really should know. You really should know what you're doing. And you can't strategize for the future if you don't know what you're currently doing and what you did before historically.
Yep.
I'm a huge fan of project plans. So
Mhm.
when we're talking about strategy, we're talking about implementation. For me, it boils down to budget. How much money do I have to spend? When do I have to start making money back? And then timing, right? So if you're going into, especially a new market, you're getting a license, you're excited. The general intuition of everyone is let's hit the ground running and be first to open. And I have seen people lose their ass being first to open because there's no product available. So you have to think about the reality of the marketplace too, and how it evolves. Should you work more internally on mastering your training, your controls, your standard operating procedures, so that when you do pull that trigger, you're full speed ahead. You're not just stumbling over the finish line, right? Because this is a marathon, not a sprint. And so as your business gets implemented and you start to spend money to build out, to open your doors, to hire staff, to get your backbone team in place, use a project plan. Things are flowing in a certain order. Programs like Smart Sheets is $30 a month, super affordable. And you can go in and plan in great detail when you want to do things to be open by when. And that should be looking at a broader strategy. If you're a processor and you just want a processing license, maybe you shouldn't open until there's enough product and enough dispensaries to sell to. Otherwise, you're just going to have open doors. You're going to be paying for staff and you don't have the business. Or can you build the business before you open your doors? Things like futures contracts. There's always an opportunity to continue to do business without being open for business. So especially in a cannabis business, especially in new markets, look at that timing and understand what your strategy should be so that you're spending money effectively, efficiently, and in a way that makes sense. And all that's going to be budget driven. If you're the biggest guy in the world, what do you care, right? But if you're probably watching this show, my guess is you're going to be a little conscious about how much money you got in your pockets. And any smart, practical business person would be. And I think that you can do this successfully if you can time that implementation and where you make those spends and purchases in alignment with where you think you're going to make that money back, and try to use those conservative numbers and beat them.
In the budget, the important thing, with using budgets, and you definitely have to use, you have to master the use of budgets, is looking at those actual results, compared to those budgets. And that's so important, and really understanding, why you have these variances and what I budgeted versus what did I actually spend. And is this going to, and how are we going to strategize in the future to get those numbers back in line. I always like, 13-week cash flows. I like to see numbers on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, and really tighten down, what our overhead is to figure out, how we're going to strategize on getting costs down and revenues up. I mean, that's the goal. Low costs, high revenues.
Yep.
Yeah,
Two ways to make money, right?
Right.
You make more and spend less. Then that's profit, right? At the end of the day. And Josephine, to your point too, there's two kind of important components when you're doing financial planning, and that's your CapEx and your OpEx.
Right.
Your capital expenditures. How much do I plan on spending to open up this business? That's your first budget. And investors are going to need to know that bottom line number, because that's what it's going to take to actually implement and open up as sort of the operating, is sort of the capital expenditure that it takes to open the business. And then you have operating expenditures, and that's your ongoing variable costs that will cause your payroll to go up. So you may need to make an additional amount in that budget, to Josephine's point. So definitely look at as detailed as you can, as much as possible, what your capital expenditures and your operating expenditures are going to look like. It's going to be really important at getting the right amount of money in the first place to open up successfully.
Yep.
Right,
may
and you really have to
time
look at
things, too.
working capital,
Yep.
what's the working capital that we need? And really look at that on a monthly basis. I mean, CapEx could, certainly be, some big numbers, particularly in the beginning. But then projecting out, maybe CapEx starts to subside, but working capital is always an issue. So you always really have to consider the working capital, what do I need? Where am I going to get it? And, do we want it in the form of debt? Do we want it in the form of equity? What's the cost of that debt? What's the cost of that equity? So those are really important business strategies to consider when, before you open and even in those early stages.
It sets the tone for your business of how it's
Right.
going. That is finding and navigating your path. So yeah, the scheduling and planning. Thank you, Mark. Yes, you have to have it mapped out. And some of the good things is maybe to pick that date that you're trying to open by and work backwards. So that's one thing that I've really found has been helpful for me, is that I know where I need to be by this point. I have to work back and then fit everything in that time frame, knowing it has to be done.
Yeah, and another pro tip too, Caleb, is if I'm authorized for 10,000 square feet, doesn't mean I need to open up 10,000 square feet, right? So I can plan this out in phases too. And if I know that I'm only going to have enough demand to warrant a third of that, then maybe I'll open a smaller grow and phase in phase 2, phase 3 later on as I grow and as the demand warrants it. So there's just smart ways to spend your money that don't require you to be the biggest, baddest, boldest on the block and have all this expense over your head when you're not making as much money coming in the door.
And that's what, that strategy, Mark, is exactly what we even do in a turnaround situation where we see companies that are in distress, whether they be cannabis or other companies, we try to get them back to those roots of, okay, if we have to turn this around, let's identify what the issues are and let's go back to square one and say, okay, let's cut back on this and then reintroduce it, in stages, as the demand is there, or, as working capital becomes more available. So it happens, it can happen on that end as well as to the beginning approaches.
So planning never ends. It's
Right,
an
that's
ongoing
right.
basis and an evaluation. That I think is something to really keep in your mind. That's the only way that you're going to be on top of what's happening in your business, happening in the market, and making those adjustments and adapting. I mean, that's what makes us so successful as humans, is our ability to adapt. You have to have the right information to make sure that you're pivoting into the right direction.
Right.
Okay, so we kind of talked about the last two sections. I do want to give an opportunity. So the next one after strategy and implementation is going into your organization and your management team. So that's your org chart, your hierarchy. So I want to give you guys a chance just to touch on those for a little bit.
Well, I mean, I'll say from definitely put together your org chart. You need to know who's accountable to whom and why. Who's in charge of the compliance, who's in charge of risk assessments, who's in charge of controls, who's going to be testing those controls. I mean, those are important people to have in place, to be able to operate. Are you ready for an audit when the IRS comes in and when the Department of Revenue comes in there? Are you ready? Who's responsible? Again, it's accountability and just having that flow of command so that people know they're accountable to someone. And a lot of times, one of the reasons I see a lot of businesses fail is because of that lack of accountability. Everybody's kind of off doing their own thing, and there's no structure to the development of the plan and the continued operations.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, we've seen all sorts of problems on the compliance side.
Mhm.
If you're treating your business like a clubhouse and everybody's smoking weed, you're not going to be that productive. You're not going to get a lot of things done. So there's just some fundamentals that there's a difference between the culture and enjoying cannabis as a culture. And if you're getting into the industry for that reason, I suggest not doing so. There's better ways to do that. Maybe a consumption venue or, some other type of ancillary business that can really get into the meat of that. But in honesty, you're running a business, and a lot of cases you can lose your license if you're consuming on site. And certainly it's a liability if you're running forklifts or pallet jacks or any other issues that might pop up with OSHA. So absolutely setting those policies in place, letting people know, hey, here are the fireable offenses that you can be let go for is extremely important down on the bottom of the org chart. And then at the top, if you're going for one of these licenses, you've often got to say how you have experience on your team, which means you're hiring people that are good for that. And I'll say that you never want to have two master growers in the same room, and not every master grower means that they're a good production manager. So you can have a very different set of skills that may be plant knowledge and plant-based that might work better in QA, QC than it would in day-to-day calendar production for the cultivation facility, for example. So looking at where your strengths and your weaknesses are with your candidates is really important to fulfilling those org chart pieces and to know what people need to execute on. Generally, you're always going to have a CEO leading the vision, always constantly selling the company, going for capital raises. You're going to have some sort of operations director, COO, manager of operations, somebody in charge of running the day-to-day and making sure that process and procedure is developed and implemented and followed. That's where that accountability comes into place. And you're always going to have somebody in charge of accounting, finances, and making sure that you've got the money you need to spend, that you're making enough money and that it's being accounted for appropriately in terms of your internal systems of control for accounts receivable, accounts payable, and making sure that the company always has its books up to date and that there's not fraud or diversion happening with money. So all of those are important components. And then you tack on your compliance, you tack on your QA, QC, and these other areas kind of underneath that org chart. A lot of that might be really important to winning a merit-based license. So it's really important to find those individuals, to put your job descriptions together in the first place, so you know what that job position really entails on that org chart. And a good understanding of the regulations is really key to understanding exactly who's needed where. So I'll just say that those are some of the fundamentals, I think, in terms of planning who you're going to put in place and then hiring for those positions. Make sure they're trained. If they don't know the rules, everybody in the organization is accountable to those rules to have your license. So corporate compliance training is really important in this industry too.
And that's continuous. I mean, it's not something that, okay, you went to one training class and you're done. It's a continuous plan for training and, being in compliance and, from an accounting and finance standpoint, how is information documented? How are you maintaining those records? And is it the best practice that you're putting forth for when, an audit does occur or, something happens that you're ready. I mean, I've got those clients who, the regulatory body could come in at any time and their books are, right there, everything's ready, everything's documented, their procedures are in place. And then you have others that, are not. And it makes it very difficult for them. And it's very difficult for those taxing authorities to, not impose, certain penalties for potential understatement of revenues because they don't see it. And you might not be understating your revenues, at least you don't think you are, but, if you don't have things documented, that they can't rely on anything. It's reliability on the information that you're maintaining, for your records.
It demonstrates the confidence to the regulators that,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah, that they can see. I mean, they're going to pick up on that business acumen and see if in one area that you're on point and everything they ask for, you're able to produce. That shows that this is how I'm in every other area of my business.
Absolutely. And I think people that would be operators or owners in the space need to ask themselves, what kind of operator do I want to be? Am I going to care about being proactive about managing these issues before they come up? Or am I going to be reactive and I'll deal with it later when it's a problem? Because there's two different mentalities. And I guarantee you, people are going to pick up on which one you put in your organization. And one of the biggest problems we have in this industry is turnover. And a lot of that is because that expense, which is a huge expense, comes straight up from the culture, from the top, on how executive team is acting, how the owners are about the business. So it's important to set the tone of your organization to be one that I think you have to ask yourself deep down, do you really want to be compliant? Do you really want to follow all of these tedious things that are the cannabis business? Because from the outside, it looks amazing. And I'm telling you, from the inside, there's just a lot of rules, regulations, compliance, controls, accountability to look at. And if you're not good at those things, you don't want to do those, then you have to hire the right people that are and put them in place to manage that so that you have a successful cannabis business, one that'll be bought up because I don't think of it as an expense. I think of it as an investment to your company for an eventual exit, which is also what you need to outline in your business plan. How am I going to get the money back out for my investors? How am I going to get my money back out for my blood, sweat, tears in this industry? And it's important to have a clear vision on what that looks like. And to get there, you got to be legitimate. Investors are only getting more sophisticated in this industry. The days of sort of the green rush 1.0 with very risk tolerant money that was kind of dumb money, I think those days are quickly ending as we look at bigger M&As, SPACs, and other businesses that are coming into the space and maybe potentially looking at your business in the future to buy out. But you have to have more documentation than they do, show that you've been doing everything right from the get-go. Otherwise, they're picking up a toxic asset. They'll beat you up on price, and then they'll have to hire someone like myself or Josephine to fix it.
Yep. All right. So then, thank you guys. The last section, which we've touched on here, which is typically how it is brought up, is the financial plans and projections, which also include part of the ask. Because with the business plan and with the pitch it could be used for a number of things as far as laying out your exact business, like what you're going to do in business. But a lot of times it's laying it out so you're in front of somebody who's potentially going to be writing the check for you to be able to then move forward with that business. So what are some of the things that operate or that the applicants need to make sure that they're taking into consideration with financial plans? We've already touched on about reasonability, feasibility. I really want to focus in on a couple more points there before we wrap today.
And you're kind of getting down to valuation. You're kind of getting down to valuation in general at the very end, right? This is what it's going to cost me. This is what I think I can make. And of course it's speculative. And of course, if it's in left field, it's not going to make any reasonable sense. So at the end of the day, you've got to be able to create your ask, right? At the very end of this, it goes back into your executive summary and your conclusion. What is it that I'm asking for? And why am I substantiating that I'm asking for that? Right? So what do you think the company is going to be worth? It's usually on a 2-year, 3-year projection. And then you're able to backtrack and say, here's what my value is. This is why I'm asking for this many millions of dollars, and why, based on that valuation, I'm going to give you X percentage, right? And I'd say for social equity applicants out there, you got to know your value bringing to the table as well. Otherwise, you're going to end up in predatory operating agreements. You better know the difference and how to spot one, because these bigger companies that maybe promise you the world to put you on an application, and even if you're involved, could end up diluting your position just to take more equity back from you. So there's a lot more considerations that go into negotiating that value and being able to come to a term that actually makes sense. And I think for Arizona and social equity, it's a pretty big conversation, as it is for a lot of other states that are going into social equity programs.
Definitely.
Right. I mean, and you hit the nail on the head, Mark. I mean, it's all about return on investment, right? The investor wants to get their money out and make money. So you've got to lay that out in your financial projection plan. That's why it can't be too simplistic. I mean, it has to have some meat to it when you're laying it out, and you've got to explain how you get there. Because I see projections every day. I mean, when I do valuations, I mean, I sometimes I'm like, well, how did you get there? We have to rely on this information, and I can't just slap it into my model and say, okay, I'm going to use this and do some kind of discounted cash flow to get to some value. No, I've got to look at it and drill down. And that's what I expect you to do as management. Drill down on how you're getting there. How are you growing, 75% by year 2? What's going to get us there? So what's the plan? Tell me exactly what you're going to do to get you there. If it's a matter of, expansion, or if it's a matter of, product margin development and increasing those margins, but I need specifics. And sometimes it gets even down to the point where you're, talking certain SKUs and laying out the information that, this is where we see for this product, but, this product might be, have a different projection of where they're going to be in a couple of years. So you really have to put the detail down to allow that investor or potential investor to feel comfortable. Same thing on the banking side. Forever, we get to that point where the banks, and some of them are lending, they want to see that detail. They're not going to throw a loan your way. They want to know that you can pay it. So you got to make sure you're incorporating that return or that payment plan within your projection, and just show even after that, this is what, this is where we stand, this after paying tax and, everything else, this is what we're left with.
Yep. So there's, as you've seen, and I think that we could continue talking for hours and hours on this subject. And I really appreciate all of the wealth of knowledge that we've gone. Just as a quick recap on the sections here before we wrap today, we start with the executive summary, which is basically the elevator pitch of your entire business plan. It's a good way to look at it. You go into your company overview, then you have your products and services. You have your market analysis, you have your strategy and implementation, your organization and management team, and then finally those financial plans and projections that show on how ultimately you're going to make money, because that's ultimately why everyone is in business, is revenue. So those
And
are
also consider, don't forget the SWOT type of analysis, to put in there. I mean, and that addresses what we were talking about before, about what makes you different. What are the strengths of my organization? What are the potential weaknesses? And then how am I going to address those weaknesses? It's like, you ever get questioned in an interview and you just, yeah, I'm wonderful and I have no weakness. I always say that, but that doesn't apply to everyone, and, just laying that out, but how you're going to address those weaknesses, how are you then going to address the opportunities and the threats, and that could be regulatory threats, that could be, just about anything. How are you going to address it as a business owner and get through this process?
Yep. You got to look internal, you got to look external, you got to look at the market, you got to look at your plans. And I think that really what I want everyone to take away from today, as you've seen, is the importance of having a solid advisor, having an advisement team, going to the professionals that are going to allow you to inform you on asking these questions, and really, and can even help with the development of your business plan in various stages. So really, the process never starts, or never ends. It's an ongoing, you are always planning, you're always evaluating, you're doing sort of mini business plans while you're operating at least once a year to really evaluate what's changed and where you're going. So it's
like a mini assessment. It's like an internal assessment that, I mean, for the most part, I mean, that's what I'll get called in to do, or it's like, can you kind of take a fresh look at what we're doing and give us, some recommendations, suggestions, and changes, to what we've been doing so far. So it doesn't hurt. I mean, I think that's a great approach, to come in there at least once a year and reassess, where they're going and where they thought they would be, and if they're there yet and what they have to do to get there.
And what I'll add to that is, we call it ongoing measures and management, because compliance is not just a checkbox that you tick off and you're all of a sudden compliant for forever. I guarantee you it's not a question of if, but when the rules are going to change. And every state usually has what I call a regulatory clockwork. So you're starting with legislation, going into rulemaking, publishing new rules. So also in addition to that, we do compliance management agreements pretty affordably to help people review their standard operating procedures every year, make sure that what you're doing is in compliance and that it's being adhered to by staff, that staff is trained on the new rules and regulations for ongoing continuous training, and that periodically throughout the year, you also measure and manage these key aspects of compliance, whether it's packaging and labeling review on your dispensary to make sure all your vendors are sending you the correct compliance on packages and labels, or whether that's an inventory reconciliation to make sure you don't have internal diversion, or that you may have misaccounted for something in the point of sale or seed to sale system. So these types of audits, I think, are really important to do pretty frequently, in addition to health and safety and OSHA, right? There's just areas of your business you have to manage and continually improve in. It's a process of ongoing continued improvement. It really never stops. And every other heavily regulated industry knows that, from pharmaceuticals to oil and gas to hospitals to pharmacies. So it's not anything that's new. It's just new in cannabis.
Good. Okay, well, we're getting to the end of our hour here today. I want to give both Josephine and Mark an opportunity to sign off. Very grateful and appreciative of you taking the time out to help to educate for the aspiring social equity applicants. And just know that in your business plan, in your areas with the 26 licenses that are available, both of the individuals that we have here today are working in the industry in ancillary and supportive businesses that aren't license holders and yet are having successful careers in cannabis. So just keep that in the back of your mind. So Mark, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. I think there's definitely a big marketplace. There's plenty of demand out there for everybody to create legitimate businesses. And there's a lot of successful models. So don't just close your mind to having a license. I think that's where everybody wants to rush to. And there's a lot of other ways to sell picks and shovels and be a part of it, to Caleb's point. Being a minority myself, caring about social justice, social equity, we are here to help. We're already looking at interstate commerce and federal permitting for cannabis legalization for social equity applicants, and allowing for more opportunity is really the key here. People have just been denied that opportunity for a long time. So if you really want to talk to somebody who knows what that's like, who's working on these issues and who cares, they can also help you navigate the complexities of it. We're here to help. You can visit us at www.comply, C-O-M-P-L-Y, cannabis.com.
Wow, that was really nice you said, Mark. Yes, I agree with Mark that there's plenty of room out there for everybody to be involved, in different capacities, in different areas, whether it's ancillary or, within plant touching business. Again, bring the right team together to make sure you're in compliance, to make sure you're in adherence with, tax regulations and that you're following the correct protocol for record keeping, accounting, internal controls, and that kind of thing. It's so important, and it's an area that people forget that could cause a lot of fraud or risk issues if they're not addressed early on and followed throughout the process. If anyone needs, any services in accounting, tax, consulting, advisory, turnaround, any of those areas, feel free to reach out to me. Again, with Beach Fleischman, and we provide services throughout the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. Thank you for having me, Caleb.
Thank you very much. So we'll go ahead and sign off. Again, a big thank you to 420 Collections as our sponsor for the META Deep Dive series. And until next time, stay elevated.
Guys.
Thank you.